my reading glasses on the kitchen table and my tea had gone cold. My daughter was in the living room with her husband, the two of them leaning over the coffee table with papers spread out between them, talking about assessed values and listing timelines like I wasn't sitting 12 feet away. My wife, Eleanor, had been gone for 19 days. I set down the mug and just stood there in the doorway, listening. They hadn't heard me come back from the garage. The Crestwood neighborhood's been climbing for 2 years, my son-in-law Derek was saying. He runs a property management company in Mississauga and has an opinion about real estate roughly every 4 minutes. If we list in April, before the spring rush, we could clear 850 easy, maybe 9. Dad's not going to want to hear that number, my daughter Renata said. She's 43, a project manager at a logistics firm in Hamilton. Organized, efficient. She gets that from Eleanor. We have to frame it as helping him. He's 68, and he just lost his wife. He doesn't need a 4-bedroom house in Oakville. That's just fact. I know that. Just let me handle it. I stepped back into the kitchen before either of them looked up. My hands were steady, which surprised me. My chest was something else entirely. I'm Walter Bream. I spent 31 years as an electrician with Hydro One, retired 6 years ago. Eleanor and I built that house in 1991. We poured ourselves into it. The addition off the back she designed herself. The garden she replanted every spring. The kitchen we renovated the year our son Liam was born. Liam. He lives in Vancouver now and calls on birthdays. I hadn't heard from him since the funeral. Eleanor had been a pharmacist for 35 years, the kind who remembered patients by name and called to check on them after a difficult prescription. Cervical cancer, diagnosed 14 months before she died. She handled it the way she handled everything, quietly, completely, without asking anyone to rearrange their life around hers. The day of the funeral, Renata had organized everything. That's fair, she's good at organizing. The flowers, the order of service, the catering back at the house after. She stood at the door and greeted people and said the right things. Derek stood beside her with his hand at her back, very supportive looking. My nephew Theo stood beside me the whole afternoon. He's 29, Eleanor's sister's boy. His mother, my sister-in-law Colette, died of an aneurysm when Theo was 11. Eleanor and I took him in, not formally, just practically. He came on weekends, then school breaks, then after his father remarried and stopped calling, he just stayed. Finished high school in our house. Eleanor taught him to drive in an empty Costco parking lot on a Sunday morning. He calls me uncle, but he means something closer than that. At the reception, Theo sat with me in the kitchen, after most people had gone and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. He made me eat a sandwich. He washed dishes without being asked. Renata came in around 8 o'clock and said she wanted to come by the following week to go through some of Eleanor's things, if that was okay. I said that was okay. I wasn't really listening properly to anything that day. She came back 4 days later, not the following week. 4 days. With Derek in a color-coded binder. They sat at the kitchen table, Eleanor's kitchen table, the big pine one she'd found at a garage sale in Burlington, and refinished herself. And Renata opened the binder and turned it toward me like she was presenting a proposal. "We've been thinking about your situation," she said. The binder had printouts, MLS listings for senior condominiums in Burlington and Brampton, a page of notes about the Oakville housing market, a printed article about the emotional benefits of downsizing after spousal loss. "You don't need to decide anything today," Derek said. He had his hands laced together on the table in a way that looked practiced. "We just want you to start thinking about it." "I haven't stopped thinking," I said. "My wife died 3 weeks ago." "Which is exactly why we're raising this now," Renata said, and her voice was so gentle and so firm at the same time that I understood she'd rehearsed it. "While you have support around you, before you're isolated and it becomes harder." "I'm not isolated." "Dad, you're in a 4-bedroom house alone. The mortgage is paid, but the property taxes alone are over $9,000 a year. The maintenance. I maintain the house. You're 68. There it was. I'm 68, therefore I'm a problem to be managed. Derek cleared his throat. "Look, Walt, the math is simple. You sell this spring. You're looking at $850,000 to $900,000, maybe more if we stage it well. After fees, you're clearing $750,000. Invest that through my brother-in-law's firm. He does very well for retirees. Combined with your pension and CPP, you'd be genuinely comfortable. And Renata and I could help oversee the financials, make sure everything's managed properly. Managed properly, I repeated. Just looked after, Renata said quickly. We're not talking about taking anything. We just want to be involved. In my finances. In your future. Liam called that evening, the first time since the funeral. The call lasted 6 minutes. He said he'd heard I was thinking about selling the house. I hadn't told anyone I was thinking any such thing. He said it made a lot of sense, that Vancouver had taught him about the value of not being tied to property. That he and his partner Jessie were really happy renting. I got the sense the call was more of a check-in about the sale than about me. After he hung up, I sat in the chair by the front window, Eleanor's reading chair, the one she'd had recovered in blue linen the summer before she got sick, and I thought about the box. Eleanor had told me about it 14 months earlier, 3 weeks after her diagnosis. She'd been very calm about it, practical in that way of hers. She'd said, when I'm gone, don't make any big decisions for at least 3 months. And in the top shelf of my closet, behind the extra blankets, there's a grey metal box. The key is on my charm bracelet, the little brass one. Don't open it until you need it. You'll know when. I hadn't opened it yet. I'd been waiting, I think, because opening it meant accepting she was really gone and had really expected this to happen and had really sat down at some point in the past year and thought everything through while I was telling myself she was going to be fine. But sitting in her chair that evening after Liam's 6-minute call, I thought, I know when. I went upstairs and found the charm bracelet in the top drawer of her dresser, still smelling faintly of the cedar blocks she kept everywhere. The little brass key was there. I took the grey box from the closet shelf, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened it. Inside was a letter in Eleanor's handwriting. Under the letter, a folder. Under the folder, a USB drive with a sticky note that said, "The lawyer has a copy. This is yours." The letter was 4 pages, front and back, written in Eleanor's small, precise script. She dated it 11 months ago. "Walter," it began, "if you're reading this, then the children have already started making plans. I say this without bitterness. I know Renata. I know Liam. I love them both, and I know exactly who they are. So I made some plans of my own. I read the whole letter without stopping. Then I sat on the bed for a long time. Then I called the number she'd written at the bottom of the last page. A woman answered on the second ring. "Bream Estate, this is Susan Walcott." "This is Walter Bream," I said. "Eleanor's husband." "Mr. Bream," she said, and her voice was warm. "I've been expecting your call. I'm sorry for your loss. Your wife was a remarkable woman. Shall I walk you through everything?" "Please," I said. This is what Eleanor had done. 11 years ago, her parents had retired and moved to a property in the Cowichan Valley on Vancouver Island, 40 acres outside of Duncan, BC, on the eastern slope of a ridge that looked out over the valley toward the water. Her father had bought it in the 80s for practically nothing. When both her parents passed within 18 months of each other, 4 years ago, Eleanor had inherited the property. I'd known about it vaguely. It seemed like a complicated thing to deal with. Property in another province, tenants, a house that needed work. Eleanor had said she'd handle it and I'd let her, because Eleanor always handled things better than I did. What I didn't know was what she'd done with it for the past 3 years. Quietly, without mentioning it to anyone, Eleanor had engaged a property management firm and a contractor in Duncan. She'd flown out twice. I'd thought both times she was visiting her friend Margaret in Victoria, which she had also done. Eleanor was thorough and supervised the renovation herself. The main farmhouse, a 4-bedroom heritage house from 1912, had been fully restored. New foundation work, new wiring and plumbing, a modern kitchen that kept the original fir cabinetry, a wood stove in the living room, a covered porch that ran the full length of the south face and looked out over the valley. She'd also had a smaller building on the property converted into a proper studio, insulated, heated, good north-facing light, wide work tables, a separate entrance. She'd done this because Theo does woodworking. Not as a hobby, seriously. He makes furniture, sculptural pieces, takes commissions. He'd been doing it in a rented space, in a shared workshop in Guelph, paying $600 a month for a bench, and 8 feet of wall space. Eleanor had written in her letter, "I watched him work in that little rented space for 3 years. And I thought, he deserves a real studio, and I have the means to give him one. So I did." She'd funded the renovations through a combination of her parents' estate and, over the past 2 years, gradual transfers from an investment account in her name alone. Her parents' savings, which she kept separate from our joint accounts. She'd established a trust to cover property taxes and maintenance for 15 years, administered through Susan Walcott's firm in Victoria. The Oakville house, the one Renata and Derek had their eyes on. Eleanor had taken out a home equity line of credit 18 months before she died. She borrowed against the house $220,000, used to fund the final phase of the BC renovation and top up the trust. The HELOC payments were on automatic withdrawal from an account she'd managed herself. The outstanding balance was still $210,000. The equity in the Oakville house, the equity Renata and Derek were quietly calculating. The number Derek had called $750 easy after fees was a fraction of what they thought. Susan Walcott explained it all patiently. Eleanor had documented every transaction, every withdrawal, every decision. Everything was legal, everything was hers to do. She'd been careful and she'd been thorough, and she'd been, as she was in most things, about 4 steps ahead of everyone around her. She left instructions about the Oakville property, Susan said. "Tell me." "She recommended you transfer ownership to your children, both of them equally. Give it to them outright, along with the HELOC. Once they understand what the actual equity is, they'll likely want to sell. That's fine. After the line of credit, realtor fees, and land transfer, they'll probably net somewhere around $60,000 to $70,000 each. Your wife thought they'd be so pleased to receive the house that they wouldn't read the mortgage documents carefully until the transfer was complete." I sat with that for a moment. "She also recommended," Susan continued, "that you update your beneficiary designations on your pension and RRSP. She suggested naming your nephew as primary beneficiary, but noted that's your decision to make. And the Cowichan property, fully held in trust, your name, no encumbrances. Renovated, furnished, ready. You could move in whenever you're ready." I thanked Susan, hung up, and sat in Eleanor's reading chair until it was dark outside. The next 3 weeks were careful, deliberate work. I let Renata's calls go mostly to voicemail, then called back in the evenings and let myself sound tired and uncertain. Yes, I was thinking about it. Yes, the house was feeling big. Yes, maybe she was right about the timing. I let her think she was right about the timing. I let her think she was slowly, gently convincing me. Meanwhile, I packed. Not everything, just what mattered. Eleanor's photograph albums. Her mother's tea set. The one we'd wrapped in newspaper 17 times over the years and never broken. My tools, my father's handplane. The chisels I'd collected over 30 years. Books. The rug from the living room that Eleanor had bought in Quebec City on our 25th anniversary. Theo helped me. He came on weeknights under the cover of various errands, and we moved things gradually to a storage locker in Burlington. He read Eleanor's letter sitting at the kitchen table one Tuesday evening, and when he finished, he set it down very carefully, like it was fragile. "She planned all of this," he said. "She planned all of it." He was quiet for a minute. "She always made me feel like I wasn't a complication," he said. "Like I was just family. Like it was just obvious." "That's because it was obvious," I said, to her. He nodded and didn't say anything else, and we loaded boxes for another hour. The close call came on the Saturday. I was carrying Eleanor's sewing cabinet out to my truck when Renata pulled into the driveway with Derek. I set the cabinet down and closed the tailgate. "Morning," I said. Renata looked at the truck. "What's all that?" "Donating some things. Your mother's sewing room was full of fabric and supplies. I don't think I'll use them." She visibly relaxed. "That's really healthy, Dad. That's a great step." Derek nodded approvingly, hands in his jacket pockets. "That's the mindset. You start loosening your grip on things. It gets easier." He looked at the house. "We were actually going to ask. Our friend Miranda does staging. She'd like to walk through and give her thoughts, just informally, nothing official." "I'll let you know when I'm ready for that," I said. "Of course, no pressure. We just want to be ready to move quickly when you are." They came inside and I made coffee. And Renata talked about a condo she'd seen in a building in Burlington with a gym and a concierge. I listened and nodded and let her talk. She didn't look in the truck. Neither of them did. They never really looked. The final meeting, I called myself. I asked Renata and Liam flying in from Vancouver for what he'd apparently decided was a significant family moment, to come to the house on a Saturday morning. Derek and his wife came too, naturally. They arrived together within 5 minutes of each other. Theo was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee, quiet. I sat in the chair at the head of the table where I'd sat for 30 years. "I've made my decision," I said, "about the house." Renata leaned forward, Liam jet-lagged and trying not to show it, straightened up. "I'm transferring ownership to you both," I said. "Equally. 50-50. All the papers are prepared. My lawyer in Victoria has coordinated with the local notary. You'll need to sign accepting the transfer, which also means accepting all associated liabilities." "Liabilities," Liam said. I set the folder on the table. "The property taxes and insurance, which you know about. And the home equity line of credit, which you may not have looked into." A pause. "There's a HELOC?" Renata asked. $210,000 outstanding, I said. "Your mother took it out 18 months ago. It's documented here." Liam picked up the folder. Renata reached over and they both read the same page at the same time, which was something they used to do with cereal boxes when they were small. I noticed that, and it made my chest hurt in a complicated way. "This says the available equity after the HELOC is..." Liam stopped. "Less than you thought," I said. Derek reached across and took the folder from Liam, scanning quickly with his property manager's eyes. I watched his face rearrange itself. "After transfer fees and commission," he said slowly, "they'd be looking at 65,000 each." "That's my estimate too," I said. "This isn't." Renata stopped, started again. "You said you were transferring the house. You made it sound like..." "I am transferring the house. The whole house, exactly as it is, exactly as your mother left it. The mortgage documents were always available. No one asked to see them." "Where's Mum's savings?" Liam said. He'd set the folder down. "She had investment accounts, RRSPs. Your mother's registered accounts passed to me directly. That's how she had them set up. And the money she spent on the HELOC, where did that go?" "She spent it," I said. "She had her reasons. It's all documented." A silence settled over the table. Theo looked at the window. "You're leaving," Renata said. It wasn't a question. "I'm retiring," I said. "Properly. I've already transferred my accounts to a credit union in BC. The movers come on Thursday." "BC," Liam said. "Your grandparents' property in the Cowichan Valley. Your mother inherited it and renovated it over the past few years. I'll be living there." "We didn't know about any renovation," Renata said. "I know." Derek had set the folder down. His jaw was working slightly. "You've been planning this." "Your mother planned it," I said. "I'm following her instructions." She hid assets. She moved money without." "Her money," I said. "Her parents' estate, her investment accounts, her decisions. All legal, all documented. My lawyer has copies of everything. If you want to challenge it, you're welcome to try. But I'd read the trust documents first." Renata's eyes were wet. I couldn't tell if it was hurt or anger, and I suspected it was both, and I felt the weight of that, because I love my daughter, even when she disappoints me. "So that's it," she said. "You're just leaving." "I'm not leaving," I said. "I'm going somewhere. There's a difference." I looked at Theo. He picked up his bag. "Theo's coming with me," I said. "Your mother had the outbuilding on the property converted into a woodworking studio. She wanted him to have it." "You're taking him," Liam said. The way he said it had a bitterness in it that told me everything I'd suspected about the distance he'd kept from Theo over the years. "He's family," I said simply. "Same as you. Your mother thought so." We walked out. There was noise behind us. Renata's voice, Derek's lower register, Liam saying something sharp. It faded as I closed the front door behind me. I stood for a moment on the porch, looking at the yard Eleanor had replanted every spring for 32 years. The tulips she put in last October were starting to come up along the front walk, which struck me as the most Eleanor thing possible. That she'd planted bulbs she knew she might not see bloom, and they were blooming anyway. Then Theo and I got in the truck. The drive to the ferry took 3 days, broken into comfortable pieces. We stopped in Sudbury the first night, Thunder Bay the second. Theo drove stretches while I slept, which I hadn't been able to do properly in weeks. I woke up outside of Wawa to flat grey lake and low cloud, and thought about Eleanor in the passenger seat of every long drive I'd ever taken. Her feet on the dashboard, her reading glasses on, one hand finding my arm when I got too quiet. The ferry from Sawassan to Swartz Bay crossed at dawn. I stood on the upper deck and watched the Gulf Islands come out of the mist and thought about nothing in particular, which felt like a gift. The Cowichan Valley property was exactly what Eleanor's photographs had shown me, and also more than I'd expected, because photographs didn't carry the smell of cedar and salt air coming up the ridge, or the particular sound a 100-year-old farmhouse makes when the wind moves through it. Not ominous, just present, like the house is breathing. Eleanor had thought of everything. The kitchen had a gas range, the kind I'd always wanted and never bought because she'd always been practical about appliances. The wood stove in the living room was already stacked with split fir from the woodpile outside. The bookshelves in the study held books I recognized, ones I'd mentioned over the years in passing. I keep meaning to read that, and a few I'd never seen, but that were exactly the kind of thing I would have chosen. She'd shipped them up in the last year, quietly, adding to the shelves of a house I didn't know existed, in a life she'd been building for me in the background of everything. Theo's studio was a separate building with its own entrance and a wood stove of its own, and workbenches along 3 walls, and a large north-facing window that gave clean, even light. He stood in the middle of it for a full minute without saying anything. "She did this for me," he said finally. "She did. She never said a word." "That was your aunt," I said. "She showed you things. She didn't announce them." He nodded and ran his hand along the workbench surface, checking it the way craftspeople check things, and I saw him decide something privately, some kind of settling into the realness of it. Renata called once, a week after we arrived. She was composed, more controlled than the last time I'd seen her. She said they'd decided to list the house in May. I said that sounded sensible. There was a silence that had things in it that neither of us were ready to say, and then she said she hoped the property in BC was working out. I said it was. "Mom would have loved it," she said. "She designed it," I said. Another silence. I know we pushed," she said. "I know it wasn't." She stopped. "I'm sorry, Dad." "I know," I said. It wasn't finished between us. There was more that needed saying, and more that probably needed time before it could be said properly. But the door was open. Liam didn't call. That was all right. Some things take longer. Theo's first commission from the BC property came in 6 weeks after we arrived, a dining table for a couple in Victoria who'd seen a piece he posted online. He built it in the studio in 2 weeks and delivered it himself, and came back looking 10 years younger. By fall, he had a waiting list. I spent those first months learning the land. 40 acres is a real thing when you're living inside it. Not abstract acreage on a document, but an actual relationship with specific ground, specific trees, a creek that ran cold off the ridge and went warm in the pools where it slowed, a field that flooded at the south end every November and drew geese down from somewhere further north, hundreds of them, the sound coming before they did on still mornings. I bought 2 Shetland sheep from a neighbor because she had too many, and I thought Eleanor would have found that funny, and I think she would have. I found her last letter in October, tucked inside a copy of the Stone Diaries on the study shelf, which I'd finally picked up on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Her handwriting on the envelope said, "For when you're ready." "Walter," it said, "you made it. You're there. I'm so glad. I want you to know that I didn't do any of this out of anger. I did it out of love. Love for you, specifically, the kind that wants to see you free and easy and sleeping through the night. The children will find their way. People generally do when they have to. Theo is your family. You know this already, but I'm saying it so you have it in writing from me. He chose us every time. That means something. Let it mean something. The valley is beautiful in October. The maples go red, and there's that particular afternoon light that comes through low across the water. I've never been there in October. I looked at photographs for years, planning. Go sit on the south porch with your tea and just be there for a while. Do it today. I love you. I am proud of you. Don't you dare spend the rest of this life being sad. I forbid it. Eleanor. I read it twice and then folded it carefully and put it in my breast pocket and went out to the south porch and sat down with my tea. The maples along the bottom of the property were exactly as red as she'd promised. The light was coming in low and amber across the valley toward the water. A heron was moving slowly along the edge of the flooded field, patient and precise. Theo came out a few minutes later, wiping sawdust from his hands, and sat down in the other chair without asking what was wrong. He looked out at the same light I was looking at. "She wrote me another one," I said. "Yeah," said the light in October would be worth seeing. Theo looked out at the valley. "She was right," he said. "I have dinner most evenings on that porch when the weather allows, which in the Cowichan Valley is more often than you'd expect. The geese come through now every November, and I've learned to listen for them. The work of learning the property, the fencing, the drainage, the rhythms of 40 acres through a full year, has given my hands something honest to do, which I needed more than I knew. Renata came to visit in the spring, alone, without Derek. She stayed 4 days, and on the last evening we sat on the porch until it was dark and talked in the way that we'd stopped talking somewhere in the busy middle of her life and mine. She said she'd known, somewhere underneath it all, that the house wasn't really about me. She said Eleanor had always seen her more clearly than she was comfortable with. "She loved you," I said. "That's what that looks like from the inside." Renata wiped her eyes and looked out at the property and said, "It's beautiful here, Dad." "It is. Your mother made it that way." I think about that Saturday morning at the kitchen table sometimes, the 4 of them arriving within minutes of each other, so coordinated, so certain they knew exactly how things were going to go. And I think about how, in the end, the thing that undid all their planning wasn't anger or confrontation. It was simply that Eleanor had been paying closer attention than any of them had. That's the part that stays with me most. Not the HELOC, not the trust, not the deed transfer. It's that my wife had watched her children clearly, honestly, without flinching from what she saw. And then she'd acted with both her head and her heart wide open. She didn't move money out of business. She moved it out of love. There's a real difference between those two things, even when the result looks the same from the outside. I spent a long time in my life being someone who looked away from uncomfortable truths, telling myself Renata was just organized, just practical, telling myself Liam would come around. Eleanor didn't look away. She saw what was there, and she made decisions based on what was actually true, not what she wished were true. That kind of clear-eyed honesty, the willingness to know a hard thing and act on it anyway, is something I had to learn late. I'm still learning it, if I'm being straight about it. What I know now is that the people who really love you don't wait for an inheritance to show up. Theo came to the hospital every single time. He drove 4 hours in a January snowstorm to sit in a waiting room for 2 hours and then drive back. He didn't announce it. He just did it. That's the thing about character. It doesn't declare itself. It shows up in the Tuesday afternoons and the unanswered texts and the times nobody's keeping score. And I think about what it takes to do what Eleanor did. Not just the intelligence of it, the trust documents, the contractor in Duncan, the years of careful, quiet planning. That took real discipline of mind. But more than that, it took steadiness. It took the ability to carry something difficult and uncertain for a long time without breaking, without needing to be seen doing it. She was sick, she was afraid, and she spent her remaining months building a future for me anyway. That is not a small thing. That is a person who decided that love was something you do even when it costs you, even when no one will ever fully know what it costs. I rode the south fence line last week, on a morning when the valley was still in fog and the ridge above was already in sun. There's a specific kind of quiet up there, not empty quiet, full quiet, the kind that has weather and birds and the sound of the creek in it. Eleanor never got to stand in that field. She planned it and funded it and chose it with care, and she never once stood in it herself. I stood there long enough to feel that properly. And then I rode on. The geese came through again last November, right on schedule. I've started to count on them.